Welcome, everyone. Thanks to everyone that's joined today. I'm Kat Jarvis from the CMX Connect Washington, D.C. chapter. We've hosted a lot of events throughout the year, but we are super excited about this one because this is our first co-hosted event with another CMX Connect chapter, the CMX Connect Silicon Valley chapter. And I know the chapter's just kicking off. So, Tim, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you to talk a little bit about the Silicon Valley chapter.
He's having so much fun in Silicon Valley, he had to drop off.
It looks like he might be frozen.
No, he's gone.
So we will we will resume that when he joins again. So maybe Tirsa, just let me know and we can talk about that at the end. So Adrian, we'll dive right into it. So we're so happy to have you join us today to talk about your new book, The Accidental Community Manager. This is a huge accomplishment. I remember when your book first came out not too long ago. I really feel like the community industry had just took it by storm. Everyone was sharing their great photos on social media, and there was so much excitement about it. So, the first thing that I wanted to kick off was actually a quote from the book. This part is from the acknowledgments at the end, where you talked a little bit about how the book came about. So, you said, I knew I needed to write all my experiences down because I had something to say. I hadn't yet read the book I wish existed, a book from the point of view of the accidental community manager. So, I wrote it myself. So, could you talk a little bit about Adrian, about the story of how the book came to be and what your mindset was when writing it and what you hoped the community industry would take away from it?
Yeah, I think, well, hello, everyone. And I just, first off, I want to thank Tim and Tirza and Kat for having me here. And for those that don't know me, my name's Adrian Speyer. I'm the head of community at Higher Logic. And I think the story of why the book came about kind of goes to my experiences being in the community software industry for such a long time. And I started writing this book in about 2017, 2018. And when you work on the vendor side, you have a view that a lot of people don't get, in the sense that I'm working with so many different communities, community managers. And the funniest thing that would always come up would be, without fail, almost every conversation I would have with someone would be, I kind of just fell into this career of community manager. And, the term kind of happened, kind of started to get coined, in my talks that, oh, I guess you're an accidental community manager like the rest of us. There's yet to be anyone, I mean, maybe in a couple of years, it'll happen that there's like a bachelor's degree of community. But as it is today, most people come from all kinds of walks of life: engineering, cooking, history, literature, social sciences, and they happen to fall into community one way or another, and turn that passion into connecting people and making that happen. And what I kind of felt at the time, there are lots of great books out there, and I'm certainly not going to take away from all the other wonderful books that have been written, but I felt like there was a book that was missing before all the other books. I kind of just felt, when I started writing this, that there wasn't a really approachable, well, you can tell from my style of writing. This isn't an academic book. I'm not footnoting. I'm not trying to use $40 words and trying to do an academic dissertation on community. And I'm not slagging anyone that did. I mean, there's some really great books out there and are really valuable, but I wanted something that was approachable. And I think that a lot of people have told me, they picked it up. I think I saw the other day, one guy's like, oh, I read it on the airplane on the way home. Like, I wanted something that you could just pick up and kind of have an easy read, maybe have a laugh or two, and not make it feel like you're reading a textbook. Although the hardcover does look like it's a textbook, I wanted it to it was almost a funny thing to have it in a textbook form and have, the swear words in it and stories about being a waiter at a short cook, restaurant and those things. And, I had a lot of fun with it. I just wanted to leave it all on the table. So that's really what the idea was. So it started with that idea of just there's all these accidental folks that are coming in. There wasn't really a book speaking to it. It doesn't mean that there isn't content for people that have been doing this a long time. Like that's the thing that's been most intriguing to me. I was recently in Vegas at the TSIA, and it's a customer success kind of event. And there were people that picked up the book that aren't really in the community space, but read it and said that they found value and things in there. I know that there are people that are veterans in the industry who have read the book and said, hey, there were things that they really hadn't thought of. And really, I just tried to cover everything soup to nuts. And my attitude writing it was, if I never get to write another book in my lifetime, I just wanted it all in there. So it's a little bit on the longer side of some of the other books that are out there, but that was on purpose.
Yeah, and Adrian, actually piggybacking off of that in terms of how your book, what was really the differentiator was there were two things right away that stood out to me. The first was that I really do feel like you wrote it from a place of empathy and authenticity, and that's something that I did find really refreshing because the language you used, it was supportive. You did use words of encouragement. It was like a mentor, like guiding us through your journey, the advice, mistakes, and lessons learned from your experience. And then the second thing that really stood out to me was it was written from a holistic view. So I felt like the book encompassed here are the things that you might want to consider thinking about, allowing you to kind of step back and see the bigger picture so that you can go to the particular chapters, you can prioritize and really take in what's most relevant to you based on where you are in your journey. So, based on those two things, you could have taken any number of approaches when deciding how to structure the book. So, are those things that you kept in the back of your mind when writing it? And how did you come about deciding on what topics to include in the book?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think at one point in the book, I talk about if time travel exists, that if I could go back in time and leave that book on my desk. So really what I did is I sat and I said to myself, if I could go back in time, and I guess this gives away my age a bit, but if I could go back about 20 years or more, I'll say more, but I won't give the exact number. And if a book was on my desk that could kind of help me, what would be those things? And that's really how I approach this. And I recognize that, and I think I say that even in the book, that I realized that people would jump around in the book because I in my mind, and the way that a lot of the folks that I've engaged with have been sole community managers, teams of one, where they had to wear all their hats, and the word community manager was a wide word where it could be, they're doing some content generation and some marketing and some, kind of channel marketing stuff. So I really wanted to have it in that broad way. But at the same time, I also wanted to, like, if you recall, I think in the chapter I talk about support communities, reminding people you're not a support agent. Like, you could be in a support community, you could be a community manager for support, but you are not a support agent. And it's really important that you just remind yourself that, because it's a very natural thing that you could fall into thinking you're a support agent and answering questions in that way. And really what your job is about building connections and being a conduit for the voice of the customer within those elements. But that's kind of the mindset I went into. So funny enough, what I did is, and it was really beneficial as well. The earliest start of this book was when Vanilla started to hire their, because Vanilla was a company separate before HireLogic purchased this last year. I did a lot of training of people that were coming on board that were new to community. So like a lot of our CSMs that would come in at the time that we were hiring had no experience in community. So firsthand, I would have these quote unquote accidental community managers. And so I'd say, okay, what are the things that they need to know? And I started to write out a curriculum. So I actually created this curriculum, and that curriculum then became a basis for, okay, here are the topics that I need to cover. And so the book was a natural flow of that, of and the feedback too, because as I was giving these courses and training, people would give me feedback. Oh, that's not clear. Can you explain that? And over time, I mean, I must have 20 or 25 folks must have gone through that, and I had opportunities as well to do workshops around it. So it was the span and cargo, while new for a lot of folks that maybe are not Higher Logic customers and never went through it, and new for people, we've been doing it for years, and so people are now being exposed to it. But it was our internal, it's the internal way that I've been explaining things, because I know that when you start a community, it can be very overwhelming, and there's a lot of things that you want to do all at once. And it was just about, okay, how do I put this kind of in a framework that settles the brain and leads to people to being successful in a way that's very approachable. I just found that a lot of the other things were, like if you're I have an American history degree, and before that, I worked in warehouses and marketing and things of this nature. And how do I approach community building if I haven't done a humanities degree? Like I have a liberal arts degree, like I can talk to you about Chaucer and Middle English. I can talk. I'm a Canadian, by the way, and I can tell you all about American history and the Louisiana Purchase and all that kind of really great stuff. But then if I go and I have to start reading this very technical social science book in humanities about psychology and things, it's a bit more complicated. So I wanted something that was very approachable, that I could give the book to my dad who's 70 and say, hey, you've been asking me all these years, what do I do? Read this book and now you'll understand.
And that's actually one thing that I really appreciated, Adrian, was the way that you approached it. Because I can say I was also, like many of us, an accidental community manager. I did start off in marketing. I fell into community work. And when I was first starting out, that's also what I was looking for when I started to research the community industry as a whole, get more familiar, with tactics and those sorts of things. And this is exactly, sort of the roadmap and guide that I would have loved during that time. And also now, working with more of a mature community, I also have found tactics in your book that really resonate. So I love that, no matter where you are in your journey, you do have something that you can take away. Now I know next to nothing about writing a book. So could you tell us and what goes into that? So could you tell us a little bit about your process of writing the book? What were some of the lessons that you learned along the way?
So I'll start by saying that writing a book is very easy. I know you're going to think I'm crazy saying that. It's the stuff that happens after the book is written that is the most complicated. I had a fear of actually finishing the book I wrote it in Word, and so I had the index. My process was very simple. Every morning, every Friday before work, I would spend a couple of hours writing, and then I would get to the bus at 5 a.m. and I would go to the office. I'd arrive at 7 a.m. Do my work for the day, go home, maybe write some time on the weekend. And it was really slow pace. I'll be honest. Like, I think that's the reason it took so long. And then wonderfully, I guess the only good thing that has come out of COVID in any way was the fact that this 5 a.m. waking up to get the bus became, I could wake up at 7 a.m. and go to work. And I could do it every day. And so every morning I was able to put in a couple of hours of writing before work. And because of that, it accelerated my ability to finish the book. So I finished the book. I want to say December 2020, memory serves me. And then I spent all of 2021 basically editing and trying to be happy with it. And I had some friends of mine read it and make sure that I was kind of in the right spot. And I used Grammarly Pro, and I was trying to figure out how I could do, because I'll be honest with you, it's not cheap to put out a professional book. But then I had a conversation with my wife about it, and I said, this is probably the only book that I put out. And would you be okay if I put a small investment behind it? So I found this really great service called Reedsy, which I'll tell everyone about. It's reddsy.com, where you can hire freelancers. And so I found this editor who works for Random House, HarperCollins. His name's Gregory Newton Brown. Fantastic guy. Knows nothing about community, but he was the perfect editor because he was able to read it and go and point out the things that I had a blind spot on, where, because I've been doing community so long, he'd say, hey, this isn't clear, or can you explain this acronym, or I think I understand what you're saying, but can you clarify that? And so he was able to get the editing done. He was able to put it in a format for the book. And there were choices that were made too. Like some people, I'm surprised no one's really said anything about it, but like you'll notice that the spacing is very tight at the top. That was done on purpose, because if I had put the big spaces in between chapters that you normally see, that would have added, I think, like 20 or 30 pages to the book. And that would increase the cost. I wasn't really interested in that. I wanted to get the book out at a reasonable price. And then I had a professional designer do, because actually the first cover I did, I showed to a designer friend of mine, and he was, to put it politely, very direct in his feedback. He said, it looks like a piece of shit. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll hire a professional designer. And I found this guy that, does award-winning design. He asked me, like, what are the designs that I like? And I was like, I wanted something simple in a color that kind of popped when someone saw it online, because I knew this wasn't going to end up at a local Barnes and Nobles. Like, this isn't a bestseller book that you'd just be at the airport that you'd pick up, but I wanted something that that really stood out, that didn't really copy the other ones, because I looked at all the other community books and they all have like these fun designs with people and dots, and originally, actually, that's what the guy had come to me, but I was like, I wanted a compass because I'm helping in direction, right? And I wanted something plain that was kind of, the book would stand out on a bookshelf, and that and it would come in that way. And I'll be honest, like, honestly, when I finished the book, I was just, I was so stressed. Like, honestly, it was just so tough. Like, I've written it, now what? And it just got to a point, I would say, just before CMX, and I know I saw some of you folks in Redwood City, the book had already been, I was waiting for the proof of it, because I had just gotten to a point where it's like, it's been 4 years. At this point, if there's typos or grammatical errors or things I've missed, like the book has to go out. Like, at some point, I can't keep holding on to it, because the other thing too is, like, I knew some of the stuff was in there and other people were coming out with thoughts or similar things that may have heard. I'm like, I wanted to get the credit of the stuff that's in there. And if you wait too long, it's kind of like, well, yeah, your stories are old hat. Like, I already know that kind of thing. So, I was just happy to get it out. And I guess the thing is, the other trick is, I told a lot of people that I was writing a book. So every time I would see people, they'd be like, hey, so how's the book coming along? Right. So it kind of kept me honest in that. But I think a lot of people were kind of like, oh, he's never going to finish that book. Like, I remember, David Spinks and I in Portland, he was saying, oh, I'm thinking about writing a book. And I'm like, yeah, same. And we were chatting about it. And he's like, yeah, it's really hard to find the time. And we were chatting about it. But, I don't think either one of us would ever think that we would complete it. So I'm really proud, that he did his and I did mine. Mine took a bit longer because, my job isn't writing books. It's doing my other work. But, really excited that it's out there and it's gotten the reaction and response that it has.
Yeah, Adrian, I would say, yeah, congratulations. This is a huge accomplishment. And I'm glad you took the time that you needed to take to write it too, because it allowed you, I feel like, to be really thoughtful and intentional with it. And I feel like that really does shine through in your book.
Well, it's interesting too, because I've talked to Richard Millington about this, and he was like, good on you to not use a publisher. See, the thing is with and others have told me this too, is that I self-published because it gave me the opportunity to make the book as best as I could have it for what I want it to be. If I had given it to an editor and they, I would have had to maybe make compromises, or I would have had a deadline where I was rushed. The book came out when I hate the word, but I'll say it, I was like fed up. I was fed up with the book. Like, I was like, this book has to go out. And I think Winnie has the the idea, which is done is better than perfect. And I was just like, at that point, I was just like, it's done. And, you press that publish button at Amazon and it goes live, and you just go, God help me, I don't know what I've done. and hopefully someone buys it. So I mean, the fact that one person has bought it is all I really was. I'm just happy at least some people bought the book.
And speaking of the chat, I want to make sure that we're also taking questions from anyone that's joined. So if you do have a question, please feel free to put in the chat. We're going to be taking questions as we go along. So please let us know if you do have a question for Adrian.
Well,
Now,
there was one thing too that I was, because we were talking before, and I just wanted to mention. I encourage anyone that has a book in them to go do it, but don't do it for money. And I think I mentioned this before when we were just chatting. Putting out this book was like, you get married because you're in love. You don't get married to make money. Like a wedding isn't an opportunity to profit. This book wasn't put out so that I could go and have a trip to Tahiti with my wife. It was a book of love for the community of community practitioners. And the thought was, I may never get another chance. Like, I mean, not to be morbid, but never know. Plane goes down, or I get hit by a bus. Like, I wanted to get it all out there. I was really nervous, actually. I was like, if this plane goes down from CMX before I get home, like, I had the Amazon app ready to click that publish button, because like there was like no way that book wasn't going to get out. Like, I was like, I didn't care. Like, I'd call my wife after, but that book is going out. Like, I don't, that was the whole thing for me. Like, I just wanted the to get out there. And if it sells one copy or it sells 100,000, although let's be realistic, there's not 100,000 copies being sold of this book. I'm just happy, and I cannot overstate how much joy it brings to me to see people sharing the book online, quoting passages of it. It's all organic. Like, I don't have a publishing company behind me that that could give out like 100 copies for free. Like, that's normally what ends up happening, right? The publishing company has a budget they set aside, they can give away copies for free and all that. No, this money came out of like my budget for like living and buying food and heating my house, and taking buying gifts for people. Like, I made a choice to say, I will put aside other things that I want in my life to get this book out. And I would say, is if you have a passion and you have something that you want to get, I really encourage you to do it. It's not as hard as you think it is. You just need to, be persistent on it, and and be passionate about it, because you're going to be with this project for a while. And, I'll tell you, there were some days it was really tough to get it right, but I just said, I got to just push through. And the bad stuff that it was in the book, I just cut out, right? Like, that's the editing process, but at least I got through it.
yeah, Adrian, we're so glad that you did, because it's your gift to the industry, and I know a lot of us have definitely benefited from the lessons that you've shared there. Now, also speaking of that, Adrian, I know you mentioned in the book that you did work on a lot of different communities. You have the stamp community to a cryptocurrency community. So, from your experience working in those different communities, what would you say are some of the defining moments in your career that really had an impact, where maybe either you made a mistake and you learned from it, or if there were any particular lessons learned that stand out the most?
I think that the biggest lessons I had came from my biggest failures, because I've been a fan, or not a fan, it's the wrong word. I've always tried to say to myself, mistakes are fine to happen, but making the same mistake again and again is kind of unacceptable. Like, you got to learn from your lessons. Like, you can make a version of the same mistake, but if you keep making the same mistakes, it's kind of like, didn't you learn the lesson the first time? And I think the thing that I really came to me, and the reason, actually, it's funny. I know this is kind of off script in the sense, like, you may have a question later about this, but early on in the book, that story that I talk about, that complete failure of one of my first enterprise communities, and how that all went sideways, and fake accounts and all that jazz, I was told to remove that story. I was told to remove it because there was no point to it. It was meandering. It didn't really have any, it would be boring for people to read through. And I said, I'm going to keep it in there because I want people to know, like, we all go through it. And I know that everyone's had that situation where, someone up top tells you to do something and you kind of be like, yes, Captain, I'll follow your thing, but you know better. And I think that was the most important lesson for me, as a young community builder, was sometimes it's worth fighting maybe fighting is the wrong word, but standing up for what you know to be the right thing to do. And I really shouldn't have allowed the fake accounts to happen, to have conversations amongst one another. It was a bad strategy. I knew it was a bad strategy, but I kind of was like, oh, well, they must know more or better because, you know, they're senior. But I knew better. I'd been doing community for a very long time, and I knew that that wasn't a good strategy. But I was kind of like, well, I guess they know better. And I guess that was one of the lessons that I've hold always now to myself, is that if someone is paying me to be the community manager, then it's my responsibility to really set my foot down and be like, if you want, if you're having me here to build this community, then you should get out of my way and let me do it the right way. Maybe you don't say this forcefully, but I mean, the attitude is kind of the lesson that I had, is not taking a back seat, because at the end of the day, when the failure happens, and that's why I take full responsibility for that failure of that community, it's on me, because it was on me to be and say, hey, we're doing the wrong things, and I know we're doing the wrong things, and just, can you let me run this the right way? And that whole story is essentially just an illustrative narrative of me just taking a backseat to my career early on, and all the lessons came from that, about being the driver and not being a passenger.
And I'm so glad that you did keep that in, Adrian, because that was definitely an important aspect of the book. And one part I'd also like to dive into next that really stood out was chapter 18. So that was Let's Get Engaged. And what we're going to throw in the chat is, you in that chat, you really outlined some of the tools that are kind of in your community toolbox that you recommended, that you found most helpful. So we're going to put that in the chat. If anyone else has tools that you find helpful in your community work day to day, please throw them in the chat. We'd love to know. But what we've put in the chat are some of those tools from the chapter. So out of those, Adrian, what would you say are a few that you have felt were most helpful in your day-to-day community work?
You know, it's funny, more and more I've just fallen in love with Monday. I hate it, but I love it at the same time. It's become a lifesaver and the bane of my existence at the same time. I am on
I
way too
relate
many
to that.
boards. Yeah, I'm on way too many boards, but it also is a way for me to keep myself organized. And has become really something I think is fantastic, and something that we're doing at Higher Logic, which is really cool in the marketing organization. And I think I need to probably write a blog post about this, essentially, but I think it could be applicable. Maybe I even wrote about it in the book. I don't remember anymore. You know, sometimes like you go into a trance and you write it, but it's about creating sprints around the community work. And what's great about it is I know how much capacity I have in the 2-week period, and I can say, okay, these are the things that I'm going to attempt to do and get done. And that way that I don't overcommit to anything, and I'm able to then, you know, kind of manage my workload in terms of content pieces that need to be created or things that need to be done. And then if it needs to, it can get bumped into the next sprint, and people have visibility into it and say, okay, like, I know you can't do it this bit, but you know, can you assist in that? And I can also bring in others into it and have a better visibility. I think the biggest mistake I made early on with community management is keeping it all in my head, because especially when you're a community manager of one, you're like, I don't need to write stuff down. I know what I'm doing. I know the work I need to do. But you know, as much as you're super smart and you know everything, it's actually so much more helpful to have it written down. And I've just found Monday's been really helpful to do that.
So there are 2 questions in the chat. Kat,
Sure.
can I jump in?
Yes, absolutely.
This one, how do you go about choosing those hills to die on, especially in more traditional environments with companies whose first foray into community come from a rigorous brand? You have to expect that 90% of the decisions you may lose. Do you have a recommendation for winning more and choosing the right ones to win?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I wish there was an easy answer to give you. It comes with time and maturity. You learn the capital that you can use, and the, you know, where you should have, like, you don't need to battle on everything. You have to pick and choose. In the sense of what I was talking about, the fake accounts, that was a battle to die on, because I know and I knew that doing that was going to lead to unhealthy community, and we were building on a crumbly foundation to begin with. So I would say the hill that you want to die on are the things that you know could ultimately lead to ultimate failure, versus, maybe I'll give an example. You may not want to have your marketing organization do advertising in the community, but your marketing team owns the budget, and you probably report to the director of marketing or the VP of marketing. That may not be a hill you want to die on. You may want to work on a compromise and find a way that you can still satisfy their goals in a way that works with the community, as opposed to putting your foot down and saying, absolutely not going to happen. That's kind of what where I would say that's kind of where you have to balance it. It's an unfortunate thing, but the reality is, like, there's a lot of relationship building and satisfying of needs of individuals that you kind of have to figure out. And you can't just say no to everything. You have to find a way to work and solve. And so that's what I would say, is that you have to pick and choose. But on the stuff that you have direct control over in terms of strategy within the community, for example, maybe ranks or category decisions or things of this nature, like those are things that you should stand on. Like, I know that if we do it this way, it'll be confusing and people will not be able to engage in the content. Like, this is as a community professional, I know this is the wrong way. Trust me. And I'll bring data, and if I'm wrong, I'll go your way. But then there's other things, like I said, if there are business needs, I wouldn't say that you give up. You have to negotiate into a way that works for both parties.
That makes sense. And I know you've had quite a few conversations about that. So that's a great question for you. But here's another one. Adrian, you said this book is the resource you wish you had when you started. Now that you have years of CM experience under your belt, what is currently exciting you about this space? Maybe you say this is your book, but what skills are the new generation of community managers going to need to master, considering we do come from so many different backgrounds?
Yeah, I honestly would say, depending on what organization that your community comes into. So if you're reporting to marketing, or you're reporting to customer success, or your customer experience, I would ask your boss, your people leader, about the books they're reading that influence them. I think it's really important. Like, I'm very lucky in the fact that the way that I came through was through a marketing organization, and I started out as a product specialist, and I was a product manager, and then I was business development, and then I did marketing management, and I managed all kinds of websites. So I had exposure to all these things. And I think the hardest thing for folks that are accidental community managers that kind of fall into it, that didn't have sort of like a business background, it's now learning how to talk in a business way to get their point across. And so the most important thing is to, I would consume like those marketing newsletters. I would listen to marketing podcasts, and I try to understand what the trends are going on and the things. That way you're able to communicate and make those connections. See, because you as a community person are going to be able to make the connections for the team that they themselves will not know. Like, we know within the community that there are certain things that we can facilitate, feedback, or we can, find case studies, or, the things that marketing folks are all a buzz about talking about. Like right now, I think there's a thing called dark social that a lot of marketing folks are talking about. And, I've made the argument that community is really dark community, right? Like, community comes when you need it out of nowhere. And a perfect example is this book, right? Like, I've been spending my career making connections and networking with folks. And when the book came out and I needed the community of community professionals to be there for me, they showed up in great numbers. And I'm like beyond, beside myself, right, with how many people went and bought the book and have shared and, written beautiful reviews on Amazon and things of this nature. And that wasn't something I solicited, it just kind of happened. So from that point of view, that's kind of where I think you can have the biggest benefit. So if your boss is in customer success, like go join like a customer success community, go read, like go join Go Gain Retain, go spend some time in there, go attend some webinars, understand the things that are keeping them up at night so that you can then align your community and have that kind of opportunity.
Well, I feel like that's a great segue. Tim, I know you had some great questions too. So I'm going to pass it over to you.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm outdoors here in Berkeley, California. So first of all, congrats on the book. I really enjoyed it. I think it's very accessible. You can definitely tell the passion behind it and the scar tissue in some cases and the experience. So that's really fun. I definitely recommend it, especially for people who are just starting out. It's really a good starting point. So one question I had was, with the recent popularity of tools to run communities that are not forum based, that are more like real time, like like your Slack, your Discord. Are there any kind of insights or important differences or things you could share, or how do you navigate those two choices in that on that
Sure.
axis?
Yeah, and I think I talked about it in the book, but if I didn't, my thoughts on it are, it's funny. Like you think like a guy that's been doing forum software be like, it's one or the other. I like both. Both is good because, there are certain times when having real-time, instantaneous community, like if you're doing like, for example, a watch party, or, there's an event going on and you want to have that real-time experience with your community around a certain event. I'll tap into my stamp community because that gives, I know Teresa loves to smile on that. But for example, what happens, there'll be a stamp release, right? Canada Post will do a live release of their stamp. And the best times that we have in our community is when we're on Facebook together and we're commenting live as the release is happening, and we're building relationships with one another and we're sharing. However, there might be people in other time zones that can't participate, not able to partake. And so afterwards as well, there's always going to be a post about the details, the information that people know, where to buy it, how to buy it, and that people can join on that based if they're on the West Coast or the East Coast or even another country. Like we have, believe it or not, like I think we have like one member from Antarctica who's like collecting. I guess he's like up in, or maybe he's lying, but that's where he says he's located. And he may not be in a time zone to have that conversation, but he can get the information and, connect with others to say, hey, can you send this up there? So I see like a lot of people, especially with Slack recently, talking about how they're getting rid of the 60-day, or I think it's like after 60 days or 90 days, the stuff gets deleted. Well, I think that's okay because you have that opportunity to use Slack as intended. Like I think the biggest mistake people made is that they were trying to get Slack to do something it wasn't. Like if for example, you can't block someone on Slack because it wasn't meant to be a tool where you're going to have people you didn't trust come in there and start, kind of messaging people and doing, like, you basically have to kick people out of the Slack, right? Like you don't have a way to block someone. It's just either they're in or they're out. And so I think Slack is great for, those immediate conversations, or Discord is great for those immediate conversations. But if you look, like Discord has added a forum component, and Slack is, because the reality is there needs a bit of a permanence that happens. And as well, and I guess kind of the argument around this book is I'm talking about B2B communities. For gaming or for hobbies, like Facebook is great. Discord is great. I find that the challenges of being is if you're a brand that's looking to connect with consumers and looking at how people consume today. Now, yes, we know that there are a lot of people using TikTok as their search engine to find stuff, but there's still a significant amount of people that still use Google. And when they're doing that search, they're going to get some content or look at that. Or if people are looking for reviews, they're going to go to Google. That's an opportunity to have an engaging presence that people can kind of connect and be there. And especially in the B2B, you want some trusted source. Like if I'm learning how to use Photoshop with Adobe, like I want to go to their community, or I know that I can get some trusted stuff as opposed to maybe some guy that does a 45-minute video that ends up being basically a promotion where, I'm sure you've all seen these videos, which it's 45 minutes to answer a 2-minute question. You kind of hope if you go to the Adobe community, and likely you would get quality content and get your answer there. And so that's kind of how I see the difference. I think there's room for it all. I'm a big fan of being where your customers are, but then at the same time, I think that there's an importance of creating those spaces on your own that you're able to connect some of your business intelligence in there and offer a more premium experience for business. Because like I said, Slack just changed the rules. Who knows? Like tomorrow, Discord could change the rules or whatever free platform that people are on. And so you always want to have a home that you can kind of be your own. And like I said, in the B2B context, like that's the thing. People will get a lot of different things from this book, but I specifically wrote it with the B2B mindset in that because that's my expertise.
Got it. Thank you.
And then I know, Adrian, another chapter that really stood out to me, and it's also based on where I'm currently at, was chapter 24, continued success. So right now, I currently work with more of a mature community, and I know a lot of the things that you mentioned in this chapter are very top of mind. You talked about revisiting your strategy and goals every quarter. You talked about regularly checking on the onboarding experience. And I know you said specifically about this chapter, if there's one chapter you do recommend that people revisit when they complete the book, it would be this chapter. So if you could pick like your top 3 takeaways from this chapter, what would those be?
Yeah, I looked at it from the point of view as, some folks such as yourself that would be dealing with more mature stuff. What would be like the one place that they could go and have a good reminder? And I think the thing that ends up happening is once you're into that growth or the tail end of growth and maturity phase, you kind of get into a sense of complacency. It's a very natural spot to be of set and forget. And so the 3 things that I think about is the staying engaged and visible, because it's very natural. Like as you start to have a lot of the community kind of answer their own questions and do that, you end up pulling back to the point that you almost never even go in there, or you're less active. And I think that there's an importance of people still knowing that you're around and caring, and so that they're not like, oh, I guess that we've been completely abandoned and they don't care. I think the other thing too is it's important to continue the conversation with members and always having that opportunity for feedback. What I mean by that, it's not necessarily surveys. That means having trusted individuals that maybe change over time, that you're able to have a conversation, say, how's the community going? What are you learning? What do you like? What don't you like? What are the things that we can change? Things change over time. There was a period where I would scoff at someone if they would say, I'm going to use TikTok for any serious business. Now, I think it's, if you're in, especially in the B2C, like if you're ignoring TikTok, you're probably going to regret that for your business. I'm still on the fence about B2B, although I know that there's a lot of brands that are starting to use it. So, but I mean, you wouldn't get that information unless you were talking to the audience and kind of saying, okay, well, where, what are the things that you're doing? And then maybe there's an opportunity to use TikTok as an opportunity to, help others discover your community. Like a lot of platforms allow you to engage TikTok in the forum and have that conversation there and then continue it. But I mean, if you're not even aware of it and you're not even having that conversation, you could miss out on an opportunity. And then the third is kind of what you're talking about, is the review and revise. It's really important that you kind of put, like I don't know about you, but I mean, every customer I've ever dealt with and any community I've dealt with, there's always a QBR, right? Where people do like, we're going to do a business review and let's, look at our goals and all this stuff. But we seldomly do like basically what would essentially be an audit of the community settings on a quarterly basis to say, okay, do our onboarding emails still make sense? Like, are we pointing people to a category that doesn't give the best first impression? or maybe like when we first started, the logged out version of the community made sense, but now with all the like I had this, I don't know if I talked about this in the book, but there was this one customer I remember dealing with, and they were having trouble with their community. And so I always like to approach it as logged out. So I went into this community, I was logged out. I was like, oh, this is a horrible community. Like, why would I ever engage? There's nothing going on here. So I was ready to go and basically be like, oh, this is a horrible community. Like, you don't tell me why I should join. There's no value. Like, why should I create an account? I don't really see any value to this. And they're like, what do you mean? There's all this stuff going on. I'm like, what are you talking about? And then they logged in and they showed me this beautiful community that had all this stuff happening. I was like, wow. But I'm like, let me show you what I see as someone who's not logged in. And they're like, oh, that's kind of, yeah, I wouldn't join either. And that was the thing. So then what we did is we changed the logged out version to have, it was just an image so that people could see what was in there and kind of say, hey, these are the things that you can get if you join. And it made it a much, I mean, I guess early on when they first started, there wasn't the content to have there, but it was kind of set and forget, right? Like they went to the business of creating their community, and they didn't really go back to kind of think about what's the experience for someone that's coming brand new. And in terms of, like you're saying, like using those different accounts is a best practice. But see, this is what people unfortunately do. They do it really well when they first launch their community. They really pay attention to that. And then in 6 months or 9 months or 12 months, they don't go back and say, you know, is it still making sense what a new person is seeing? And I know everyone's guilty of it. I know everyone's guilty of it. They don't bother going to back. Oh, it's fine. Like, no, I haven't heard from anyone. Here's the reality. When people are upset or things don't work out, it's very rare you hear from someone. They close their computer, or they go elsewhere, or, you know, I mean, maybe you're lucky and you have a community where people are just very vocal, but there's a lot of times where people just don't say anything. And so that's kind of why I was saying this chapter is so important. If for nothing else for that, is just to remind people, as difficult as it is and annoying sometimes, you need to go and do that audit back forth and go, okay, let me just use all those accounts I created maybe my first year. Okay, do logged out users see the same thing? Do level 1 members see the things that they are supposed to do? Level 2 members see what they're supposed to see? Is the welcome email still pointing people to the best resources? Is it giving really the best experience? Are there other things that we could add into that process? Are there better ways that we can do things? Maybe there's a new program that we can introduce, or a buddy system, or, you know, and I feel like we just get so, it ain't broke. I'm not, you know, like, no one's complaining about it. It's working fine. I'm not going to look at it. So maybe it's ambitious to do every quarter. I'm a big fan of it, but, you know, at the very least, give yourself an annual. I don't know. Like, a lot of times people have time over Christmas. And I know it's easy to just turn on Netflix and just say, I'm going to watch some TV and pretend to be working, which you shouldn't be doing anyways. But, you know, I know some people will do it anyways. But hey, it's a perfect time to start doing your audit, you know, and take a look and see what kind of weird stuff you find.
I love that you mentioned that, Adrian, as a best practice. I know with the community that I work with, we actually do audits on a monthly basis, because that's the last thing you want is someone coming to the community. There's a broken link, there's a widget missing somewhere. So I think that is fantastic advice. And another chapter, Adrian, that I really loved, that I think is really important for our industry, is chapter 25, which was Listen to Your Health. So I know us as community managers, we are at high risk of burnout. You know, we do wear, as you mentioned, a lot of hats. We work with members, we work with stakeholders. So could you share a little bit about your experience with burnout throughout your career, and what you have found has helped you, and suggestions?
Yeah, so I mean, for those that haven't read the book and the story, it was essentially I got really sick working, to the point that my employer, which I was very lucky at the time, sent me to some specialists who I was having trouble keeping my food down. I was breaking out into all kinds of weird rashes. I was having trouble breathing at random points during the day. And my employer sent me to basically a disease specialist in the city of Montreal, like a high end, only if you know someone that you would, kind of get access to. And they sent me for every test in the world that you could think of, like literally, battery of tests. Like, it was really a serious thing. And I talk about it. I went to the doctor. My dad came with me because I was just nervous I wouldn't be able to drive home. Like I was going to find out that I had some kind of uncurable disease, or and he just he said to me like, you work in a stressful environment, and I lied to him. I'm like, it's not that stressful. And he's like, I know where you work. It's stressful. And he said, there's nothing wrong with you. He goes, it's all in your head. And I was kind of like, it's all in my head. He's like, yeah, it's stress. Stress is what's causing that. And maybe I'm lucky in the DNA of the way my brain works. It was kind of like, well, that's stupid. And I just was like, well, then I just have to make some changes to that. And part of that was starting to respect my weekend, setting boundaries, learning to put myself first in many ways. And I was really lucky in many ways as well that my wife is in the medical profession and would say to me, no one's going to die in your community. Like what you're doing is not life-saving stuff. Like, yeah, it matters, but at the end of the day, like you have to take care of yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your community. So that was kind of a really important lesson for me to practice. And so people may even notice this if they're stalking me. There will be periods where I'll go very quiet on social media, or it seems like I disappear for times because I'm just recalibrating myself health wise, just because I don't want to get to a point where I'm not the best self to be there for my community and my family. And it's tough, but you have to set boundaries for yourself, because at the end of the day, like it can creep up on you if you're not careful. And I think the best thing I ever did was I took a vacation. I mean, I probably wouldn't do it now, but I took a cruise before COVID and all that stuff. But I don't know if anyone here's ever been on a cruise, but the internet's not very good on a cruise, and if you want to get it, it's super expensive. So I didn't get it, and it was like it was a total digital detox for like a week, and it was probably the best week of my life. I had no idea. Like honestly, the world could have blown up. I didn't know. I was on vacation. The sun was out. There were drinks with little umbrellas on it. It was fantastic. I spent an enormous amount of time with my wife. We got, it was our 5-year anniversary. We had a great time, and the best experience. And when I got back, it was like, okay, I've got to try to bring a bit of this to my life, to just, and so when I catch myself having not taken vacation or spending the right amount of time, I'm very mindful of, okay, you know what, I've got to take care of that. And the other thing too is that's kind of why I also wanted to talk about a lot of the things in the book. Hopefully people follow some of this, is if you build the community the right way, you should be able to build folks and processes in there that you can take a week and not worry about everything burning down. And the challenge I had is that and a lot of the work I did, I didn't write things out. I didn't have a process. I didn't have someone I could trust. And therefore that added to, because I know there's a joke, oh, if you're a community manager, you can never take time off. And it's fun to joke about, but honestly, it's not funny, because what will happen is you'll see your quality of life will go down. You'll be snappy with individuals. You won't be present for your family when you need to be present. And that's just not a great way to live, and also not a great way to be there for your community when it's a very draining job, right? Like, let's be honest, because you have to lead with empathy, and if you give all your empathy to your community and then you have nothing left for your family, it's kind of crappy for everybody.
And I love, Adrian, too, how you and other folks in the industry are setting a great example. It's funny, actually, I noticed the other day, I don't know if anyone else did as well. In Before the Luck, I listen to the podcast regularly, and I did notice, they didn't have recordings for maybe about 2 weeks. And I thought to myself, I didn't know, what was going on, but I thought to myself, oh, I hope they're okay. But then they came back and they said, hey, we took 2 weeks off. And I just think, that's so important that in the industry we are, setting that example and, showing that you should take time off.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that you hopefully are building the programs and processes in place so that you're not in a crisis mode of taking off. Like
Yes.
that's the whole hope, is that if you follow what's in the book and you think about the way that you create things, or even like, let's say, even if you're early on, by the simple fact that you have things written out, because I can tell you, like early on, there were some communities where I didn't have any brand advocates that I had, but I had clear documentation. Like, these are the bare minimum tasks that I need you to do when I'm gone, and it was written out. And here's who to contact if X happens, and here's who to contact if Y happens, and if all else should fail, this is who you can call. But at the end of the day, and I've been doing this, I don't know, Jesus, over 15 years. There's never been anything that was like, even when I got back and people were like, oh my God, like this happened. It was like, okay, but did it get resolved? Yeah, it worked out. Like it was never like, there's never been anything that was, and most people understand, like, you have to take time off. Like it's just the reality of it. So hopefully, this encourage, that's why I kind of felt, I think I even said in the book, I'm giving you permission, take off, like take proper time off for yourself. Like you have to. It's just, I don't know. If you need me to write a note for your boss, I will. Like, my handwriting's bad enough, so he may think it's a doctor's note.
So, Adrian, one of the last questions I had is, you had so many great things in the book. What didn't make the cut? What are some of those favorite last quick stories that you did not get a chance to share in the book?
Yeah, I thought about that. I mean, the best stories are the ones that I saved that make tears of laugh, or all the stamp stories and all the, because here's the thing. I had to stay on topic of it being a B2B community, at least for me, because I could tell about all the other communities that I built. Like I had a community about fast food. That was funny. I had this community for fast food, people that love fast food, and it was so good at the SEO that people were confused and thinking that I owned those fast food companies. Like I would get complaints from employees at McDonald's about the treatment they were getting from their manager. And I'm like, I am not McDonald's HR. Like, I feel bad for you. And here's who you should go contact with your story. But I created this community that was just, really active. I know it sounds stupid, right? A fast food community. It did really well. I made a ton of money in AdSense, and a whole bunch of us fans that I got to learn a whole bunch of different fast food restaurants and tricks and off the menu items. And this is before social media adventures in fast food. It's no longer around, but it was a fun little time to, kind of create those types of communities. This is like before social media really took off. So, those types of things, those fun little stories didn't really make the cut of the book. And I also had a whole, like I appreciate Tim was saying that he enjoyed that story at the beginning. I had a whole much of my bio, but I was like, people don't really care about my whole life story. Like the fact that I played like T-ball and was an MVP and, a bunch of other stuff. Like it was kind of useless. Like why I became a stamp collector and all those things. Those, I mean, they're interesting to me, but people reading the book would be kind of like, can you guys, I think the saying was from Bon Jovi, "Don't bore us, get to the chorus." So there was a lot of stuff that got edited out. Easily could have been a 500-page book. So there was a lot of stuff that going back to what your earlier question was, how did I go about writing it, is I just wrote every day. And I didn't worry about, is this right for the book? It was just, I'm going to write. And I had set myself a goal of 1,500 words a day, because I had done some wacky math based on 50,000 words for a book. If I write 1,500 a day and blah, 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 that I would get to the, because a book is supposed to be about 50,000, between 50 and 70,000 words. And I'd done some backwards calculation. If I do 1,500 words, I will get there at a certain date. And so it's kind of like what they say about drawing, same as writing. Like you draw every day, you write every day. some stuff works, some stuff doesn't. I mean, there was a point where I was just, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I rearranged the chapters that I was like, oh, that chapter should go maybe here, and then other people were like, oh, that chapter should go there. I mean, there was a lot of that happened as well. So yeah, the book lost a lot of like fun, maybe stories that were fun for me but were not really relevant. And I didn't want to, people know that I love to tell tangential stories and I can go off on a path away, but I didn't want to like have it overwhelm the book too much. So there was certainly a lot of editing of those types of stories.
Perfect. Well, Adrian, thanks for joining us. And actually, what we're going to do now is if anyone has not read the book, we're going to throw some links in the chat. We're going to put where you can buy Adrian's book, also where you can connect with him. Adrian, is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, I will just say, because in case people don't see the chat, if you go to adrianspeyer.com, all the links for social media, where to buy the book, all that stuff's there. And I have a newsletter tied to the book, but it's not like a newsletter like everyone else's, like where I send it out on a regular basis. It's kind of when there's a thought that's related to the book that's connected there. And if another book should happen to come out in the future that I'm working on, maybe or maybe not, you would first note about it there. I would tell you.
Perfect. Everyone go check out the links. And as we mentioned, this was our first CMX event that was co-hosted with the Silicon Valley chapter. So Tim, if you like, maybe share a little bit about the new chapter.
Yeah, just really quick. So we started 3 years ago after CMX 2019, the summit, got a couple of good events done, and then COVID hit. And so I'm trying to reboot it. We're reaching out. If you're local, if you know anyone local in the South Bay or on the peninsula who's into this type of stuff, and we're just trying to get together, get some regular programming going, like events or just hanging out. It doesn't have to be super formal. I put a like save the date on the calendar for January 23rd, which is a community manager appreciation day. And so we're definitely going to have some kind of party or meetup or whatever, with or without speakers. We'll see what happens, but definitely have some fun there. And then, between now and then, or definitely after, more opportunities to get together and learn and hear good stuff like Adrian's stuff today. So thanks.
Thanks, Tim. And I know on our side, anyone in the Washington, D.C., DMV area, we do have another event coming up on November 18th. It's a work together day. So we are getting together in Arlington at Association Analytics, and that is on Friday, November 18th. So we hope to see everyone there.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks,
For
everyone.
joining,
Thanks everyone for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks.